go down to the next scene. And that, we're good to go. I'm just going to center you a little bit, and maybe I'll make it even worse. But you're good to go, man.
That's good.
Okay, good morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Callaway. Who here has used IRC before? I hope everyone. Okay. So, is everyone familiar with how addresses are cloaked and that sort of thing? Okay. Alright, well, we're going to go over that just in case. The question of can you uncloak addresses on IRC is yes. Now, how are we going to go about doing that? Okay, a little bit about me. I'm an independent digital security consultant. I won the Sensic SAN contest in August 2007. I used to work at Stake and Symantec in New York, and there's my Twitter and email address if you want to get in touch with me. So here's some techniques that were used years ago that were used to get people's IP addresses on IRC. The first and most obvious one is DCC, Direct Client Connection. You usually see a lot of egg drop and software piracy, aka where's bots, use this technique. So the idea is if you have a DCC connection with somebody, which is a direct client connection, you're directly connected to their PC. So all you have to do is do a netstat or run some DCC command in order to determine what their address is. So pretty trivial. But that doesn't work if they're doing software piracy from a shell. So another thing that's vulnerable with DCC is that there's a race condition, because very often the listening port will be in sequential order when it binds the port. So if they bound to network port 1025 the first time, they're going to bind to 1026 the next time. So you can connect to that port before the intended recipient binds to it and download the ODE for yourself. Another way that getting IP addresses on IRC used to happen years ago, and it still can happen this way, is that you paste a link to someone in a private message. When they visit that link, then you just check the access log and see where the browser connected from. This was also pretty popular on the Craigslist website for a while. What you were able to do was, if you were in one of the forums for, selling merchandise or, selling your old couch or whatever, and you wanted to upload a picture of it, then you could inline an image tag. And what you would do is just have that image tag link to a web server that was under your control, and then you would check the access log just like before. So if you'll notice here, this is a screenshot of Craigslist recently, and I've highlighted here at the bottom, it says externally hosted images are no longer allowed in for sale ads. So the reason that they were doing that, I guess, is because people were starting to get stalked. So you've got to use the approved Craigslist image upload site for that now. So how do IRC daemons cloak clients? Basically what happens is there's a setting in the IRCD configuration file that allows you to load a module, which is basically a cloak module, and it'll take a truncated MD5 hash and place that in the first octet of the DNS address. Or if it's a numeric IP address, it'll just make the whole thing MD5 hashes, as you can see in the highlighted blue text there. And the IPv6 notation is cloaked in a similar manner. So this is how you can see if what sort of cloak module is actually loaded. You just run a quote module, and you can check any server, no matter, like, it doesn't just check the local server, it takes an argument of the server name. So if you're on server 1, you can provide the argument server 2 to the module command and check what it's using as well. It doesn't always have to be MD5, it could be SHA-1 or something else, but for our purposes it doesn't really matter. And the highlighted text in red at the bottom there shows the server's response to the module command. First line there says it's a cloak module, MD5 hash. So manually cloaking an IRC client, and you see this very often on the Freenode network. What they'll do is they'll register with hostserv, and they'll set their user mode +X. And what this will do is it'll change their host name to basically whatever they registered with hostserv with. So they can make it whatever they want, really. They can make it look like they're from Google.com or anywhere, as long as there's an IRC operator that approves it. And there's also a slew of other commands you can use. They're not always RFC compliant, but they're listed at the very bottom there. You can change the username, you can change the host, you can change the real name, all that sort of good stuff. So this is the code that actually cloaks the host name. And this is from Unreal IRCD. You can see where it does a sprintf to concatenate the partial host mask with the MD5 cipher. And this is how it does it with a numeric IPv4 address as opposed to a DNS host name. And in the comment there is basically the pseudocode that shows you how it decides where to place each hash. So this is an example of how to cloak and uncloak yourself. About halfway down the page there, you can see where they set umode -X. So they basically did mode, nickname, -X, and there it has their real host, 192.168.1.6. And then at the bottom here, they re-enabled the cloak by setting mode, nickname, +X, and you can see the actual cloaked address there. Those are MD5 hashes. And as I said before, it's not always MD5. It can be SHA-1, as evidenced by this server response right here, where I have the SHA-1 encryption information underlined right there, and that's for the ANOPE IRC services. It's enabled on, that looks like the server for Anonymous. Address cloaking process. So basically what happens is they salt the hashes. So in other words, so each individual IRC network doesn't cloak the addresses the same. Like you'd have a problem if that happened, because then you would be able to jump on one IRC network, see how it was cloaked, and then jump on another IRC network, and since it had the same cloak, you would know what the address would be. In other words, that's a known plaintext attack. And every IRC server on the network uses the same salt, or the same initialization vector for input to the hash function. So this is the command for Unreal IRCD that generates the keys that are used to initialize the hash function. So they're completely random. Those are used on every IRC server across the entire network. So this is just going to demonstrate a chosen ciphertext attack, which is basically you can't prevent it at all with cloaked addresses, because since the same key is used to initialize the hash function every time, if you connect with the same address, you're going to end up with the same cloak. And as you can see here, the reason the cloaked host names are equals is because the real address is equal. So since I disconnected and reconnected, you can see that the date on the first one is September 3rd, and the date on the next one is August 13th, but they still have the same cloak. So you know that if that cloak's changed, then they've changed host names. Getting MD5 seed values. This is pretty simple. That Unreal GenCloak command earlier that was used to generate the random keys, it's seeded by the time. So if you run these commands here, you're able to determine what time the IRC server was started, so you know which time to use as input to the GenCloak command to get the keys. Now, this is pretty interesting. But the problem with this is that the hashes are truncated. And when I first started looking at this, I thought encryption was the way to go. But it's not. There's actually a way to do much better, and much faster, and much easier. So, I went back to the drawing board. And this is the easy way to do it. Basically, what you do is you set a bandmask exception of global on a channel. And then you just enumerate all of the IPv4 octets that are out there. So 1 through 255. You're eventually going to hit one. And you're doing this inside a channel that you're nobody else knows about, so it's completely passive. Nobody's going to see you doing it. And when you ask ChanServe to unban the user that you're targeting, then it will unban the bans that you set that match their address. So once you get the first octet done, then you move on to the second one until you get all 4 octets. So basically the reason this works is that the services daemon has got access to the entire IRC network. It can do anything, it can see everything. It sees all of the server-to-server traffic, it sees all of the client-to-server traffic. So anything that goes on the network, including every client's real address, it's able to see, which is why this works. And this is kind of a diagram of why it works. So when I'm asking the IRC services to unban my target user from my IRC server here in the lower right, it goes through IRC services, which is able to see everything that's going on the target user server, and then it sends the response back to me. So what IRC services were tested? I tested a theme, a nope, and the Nora stats, and these are pretty much the most in use IRC services software out there today. This is just a general rundown of each IRC services software. Freenode runs a theme. A nope comes with Unreal IRCD out of the box. I haven't seen the Nora stats a whole lot of places, but it's out there. Basically, as long as you see like a nickserv or chanserv, then you can be relatively sure that there's an IRC services software in use. And you can get a lot more information about IRC services on irc-wiki.org. This is why we have the problem we have. IRC daemons have just become this huge spaghetti ball of nonsense. They're all over the place. So you will have a bug in one daemon, and then the code gets forked, and then the bug gets into the other daemons, and it's just ridiculous. And this attack is actually RFC compliant too. So, setting up a hideout, you want to set up a channel where nobody notices you doing this, because if you do it in the public channel, then it's going to be pretty obvious what's going on. So what you do is you set up a hideout channel, and you've got to be registered with IRC services to do that. So you've got to be registered with nickserv. You've got to identify with your password to nickserv, and then you register to chanserv. And this isn't really necessary, but what I like to do is I like to lock everybody out. You know, set the channel mode invite only. You know, unlock everything so the modes don't change. And, you know, just try to keep it as secretive as possible. So, this is how you enumerate IPs with ANOPE IRC services. ANOPE is the one that comes packaged with Unreal IRCD by default. You'll use BotServ to execute the unban command instead of asking chanserv to do it. So you just you know, ban the first octet like you see at the bottom here. And the way that you know you can stack that many bans, when you connect to the IRC server or you run the version command, you'll get this output. And where you see modes equal 12, that's how many bans you can stack. Well, how many modes you can stack, but for our purposes, we want to be able to stack as many bans as possible without flooding off the network. And then I like to use chanserv and set up protect and enforce so the channel is all protected and, you know, nobody can take over, you know, just in case. To match those bans, what you do is you use the bot that you set up with BotServ, and you run a command which is !unban. You send it right into the channel. You unban the nickname, and whatever the IRC services server unbans is the mask that matches that user. There's going to be a demo of this if you guys aren't quite following along. Another way you can do that is on a theme, which is the IRC services software that Freenode uses. You can just private message chanserv and do unban channel nickname instead of using BotServ like you have to on Unreal. And another thing that is really useful, the bottom command there that says clear channel bans, what you're going to end up with, since you're setting all these bans, only the ones that match are going to get unbanned by IRC services. So you're going to end up with all these stray bans, and eventually the ban list is going to fill up. Well, if you unbanned all those yourself, you're going to end up flooding yourself off. So what you do is you get ChanServe to unban all those for you by sending it a clear channel bans command. And this is an example of the attack in action. This was on Unreal with ANOPE, basically default setup. As you can see at the bottom there, I ran the final unban command for the last IPv4 octet, and it unbanned their IP address. And where it says mode change by services on the last line, services is the name of the server. It doesn't necessarily have to be a user that's changing modes on a channel. Like it could be services.freenode.net or whatever. So that's how that works. There's a lot of ways to optimize this. You can take out all of the special use slider blocks, so that way you don't have to enumerate those, and it reduces the IP space and makes it a bit more manageable, so it doesn't take forever to determine the IP address. And yeah, other ways that you can see plain text IP addresses. Sometimes you'll see them in bot logs, where somebody connects to a egg drop bot through DCC chat. Sometimes an IRC stats CGI script. Like, you know how you have those scripts on the web that'll say like who was in a channel at a certain time and what's the average time of day when that channel is the most active and thus and such. They'll occasionally leak addresses as well. So we're going to step it up a notch here because we can still do better than enumeration. What you do is similar. This only works on A theme, but this is similar to the ANOPE attack in that you do need to register with NixServe and ChanServe. However, there's a new feature that allows you to include CIDR blocks in the ban masks. So what you do is you start with /2, which basically narrows the IP space in half. And you do that for each chunk of IP space. And then this CS AKIT command, CS stands for ChanServe, and that's, instead of actually private messaging ChanServe, this is just another insurance to stop your bot from flooding off. So like the less text you need to send, the better. So once you send ChanServe these AKIT commands, after the del nick command, the CS AKIT chan del kit command, what it will do is it will unban the ban masks from up here that match your target user. That match the nickname. So what I've narrowed this down to is a binary search. So for those of you that don't know what a binary search is, it's a algorithm in computer science that basically says, pick a number between 1 and 100, and the fastest way to do that is to pick, halfway between, which would be 50, and then you pick halfway between again until you find the mystery number. So that takes us from a linear complexity of big O of n down to a logarithmic complexity of log of n. So basically our runtime is going to be anywhere below that red line now instead of following that blue line. And this is also possible against IPv6 and Tor. the complexity or the amount of runtime that it takes to determine an IPv6 address versus an IPv4 address isn't that much higher, especially when you're using a logarithmic algorithm. And also, if you're going after someone with a Tor address, you're able to get their .onion address. So these are some exploitable IRC networks. Freenode has become the largest IRC network out there, and it's vulnerable. I tested against Verizon. I tested against Anonops, which is Anonymous's IRC network. I tested against Mozilla. I tested against Indie Media, Swift, and there's probably a whole bunch of other backorders IRC networks out there that are vulnerable as well. And yeah, here's some more. So Obsidian, Funetic. I don't know if you guys have heard of any of these, but yeah, they're all vulnerable too. And the funny thing about this was it was supposed to be patched back in 2008. I had to go on the Wayback Machine to get this one. This is from Epana IRC services. And the IRC services that are used today were forked from Epana. So I guess the vulnerability leaked into there. But the thing is that it's not just a problem with the unban command or the akick command that was using earlier. There's lots of other commands that are exploitable because it's an architectural problem. They can patch this unban command, they can patch akick, it's still going to work. And it's going to take a while for them to get it fixed properly. Simply by the fact that it's an architectural problem and it's not an individual command. I don't know if they're going to have to update the RFC or, they're just going to have to do some major changes to their code base, but something needs to be done. Okay, I got a video demo showing one of my bots decloaking someone's IP address. You guys like to take a look? I also hit their full IP down around CIDR block /28 or /29. I didn't have to do the full 32 bits. And there it is. Done. It's the .16. .20. And game over. So this is everybody's IP address from Pound DerbyCon on Freenode. I also gave this talk at DerbyCon last month. So yeah, that's I thought there was a dead cat. Yeah, so that's pretty much everybody. Some of these guys had a wrong reverse, so I couldn't include the DNS host name. I don't know if they did that intentionally or not. Thought it was pretty interesting that someone was running from Gentoo's mail server there. Besides that, it looks like a lot of DOCSIS cable modems and the occasional inode shell. I was going to do BSides, but you guys didn't seem to have a major IRC presence. Not that I could find, anyway. Oh, and just to prove that this still works, I went on Freenode last night and I checked the version of their IRC services software. And last time it was updated was July 10th, 2013, as you can see there with the red circle. And I also grepped through the change logs for the latest alpha development of ANOPE theme, and neither one of them seems to have anything, so yeah, it still works. Had to throw that meme in there. So, we've got the address, now what can we do? I thought this would be really useful for botnet investigation. Whether you wanted to take over a botnet for red team purposes, or if you just wanted to notify providers or compromised individuals for blue team purposes. And then another thing you can do is you can download blacklists and check if the IP address that you uncloaked matches like a spammer blacklist or a scammer blacklist, that type of thing. And yeah, here's some websites that are pretty interesting with regards to botnets. I'm going to be running a contest. Basically, all you have to do is use my exploits to find someone on IRC with an interesting address. And the prizes are mint condition 3-volume set of TCP/IP Illustrated and vintage box set of Unixware. Most people know it as SCOBA Unixware, but this copy is actually so old that it was made by Univel. It includes all the manuals, and the CD-ROM, and all the floppy disks, and all that good stuff. There's a couple websites here that are really good for reference. The website at the top, though, the decal.sdf.org, is the website that has the exploits and information about the competition. So it'd be really interesting to see if someone could find an IRC user that's using IRC from either a military address or a government address. Maybe not necessarily the United States, but either that or like a NATO.int, or anything interesting I'll accept. And it also has to be vetted, so I'm sure that you didn't just log into some military box and sign on to IRC yourself. So I'll make sure their nicknames was registered with NixServe, like before I gave this presentation. Either that or they were signed on before that. I'm going to vet it to make sure it's legit. Yeah, the other thing, like I said before, vhosts are not going to work. You can register with HostServe. It doesn't matter if it's cloaked. It doesn't matter if it's a virtual host. Your IP address is still out there for people to see. If the IRC server knows what it is, then the IRC services knows what it is, which means anybody can know what it is. Oh yeah, this was a pretty interesting workaround which I saw on A theme. if you set the channel so it doesn't have any operators, then you're unable to set any bands. So nobody could be able to set the bands to find the IP address. So countermeasures are basically, you guys probably already know, use a bounce, use a proxy. There's tons of software out there. Something I noticed with Mibit is that that's a web-based IRC client, is that it will put your IP address in the real name field. So when somebody whois's you, they'll see your IP address, even though your host mask is whatever.mibit.com. But to get around that, you can do a quote set name and change your real name field and still be connected without anybody really knowing who you are. But then if they whois you, they can see what the old nickname's real name was. So that's kind of a losing battle. And same thing if you ever remove umode -x and then set it again. So basically, if at any time your real address is in your host mask, and somebody comes on a couple days later and does a whowas on your nickname, then they'll be able to see your real address, even though it may be cloaked at that particular point in time. Yeah, I know you guys know how to use proxies. David Cameron. So I just wanted to give a shout out to Dylan Webb. He's been helping me a lot on this. He came up with the idea for the Spot the Fed contest. He told me I should bring it to B-Sides. David Klein helped me out with the original Unreal IRCD exploit, helped me beta test it. Hal Brodigan always answers my Ruby questions. John Tan from Loft Heavy Industries and Hacker News, one of my old colleagues, really cool. Shane McCauley, he's a really good friend of mine too. Does anybody have any questions? Any questions? No questions?
I missed most of the earlier stuff, so you may have I don't know if you have anything on this. I sometimes have used IRC on I2P where everybody's IP is obfuscated. Everybody's going through this, well, logical mesh network where you don't know who's who. And I've noticed that sometimes you could go in and go info. You can find out the username they logged into the machine as, because it would automatically pull that up in ident. But have you looked at anything about deobfuscating those people?
No, I have not. No, I only looked at Tor, but I'll have to take a look at that. Which network were you able to connect to with I2P?
Oh, an internal I2P network.
Oh, okay.
It's all hosted inside of I2P.
Okay, I got you. Yeah, good point. Good point. I never thought of that. Any other questions or comments? All right, I guess we'll close it out then. Yeah, check out the website that's listed there if you're interested in participating in the contest. Whoever submits the first interesting entry first wins, and I'll be snail mailing you the prizes. Is that a question?
Are you going to post up these slides or will they be available?
Yeah, they'll be available on my website. Okay then.